Thank you. Kostya, thank you for the introduction. My name is Margarita, and my colleague Masha is here with me today to help me tell you guys about the experiments that we're doing at Ego Translating. We all know that translation is a multifaceted process, especially when it comes to machine translation. So it's a given, right? And then the performance of the machine is influenced by the actually nature of the machine, the processes, and the post-editing. And each part has its specificity, and we will try to tell you more about this in our presentation. So we will not be talking about the architecture, but instead we'll look into the other two aspects that we can control, the data and the post-editing. Regarding data, we do a lot of customizing, breaking down the data into categories, by topic, by the domain, etc. Plus we do corporate settings as well, as we call it, because I believe it is, well, it's a well-known fact that topic-based customizing is not as effective as if you do it by the client, by their specificity, the industry, etc. So, based on the evidence available from the experiments, we learned that if you look at this diamond-shaped empty data chunk, you can actually make it a true diamond by eliminating what's not up to the standard, and that depends. The quality of that cleaning depends on how sophisticated your system is and whether you have the resources, including financial, to do this. Because initially we thought that the more data we put in, the better the database. But we learned that it is not always the case. That is why we decided at some point that we should do the cleaning, and Maria will tell you more about that. Now, once we're out of the gray area, we work with the terminology, we manage the quality, adjusting the terms for the translation itself, and our ultimate goal is the style, of course, but we are getting there. We're not there yet. At this point, we know that there are different types of cleaning and different types of data that give us certain limits when we train. In other words, at some point, this data does not receive any new additions, and so the quality of the machine could stay the same, or there might be just a minimum change and it will not give us any representation, or the metrics could even, the results could even go down. So we need to decide how do we measure and interpret quality, what do we do with the settings, and we believe that first of all it is the goal. I mean, this user experience that depends on why you are implementing MTU, whether it is to increase the conversion, to improve the quality, the speed of translation, whatnot. And secondly, if we're talking about LSPs, and this is what we're talking about as a company, this is about one of the conditions and reasons for MT, which is that the machine translation and post-editing should be twice faster than translating it, than having translators do that. So it has to be, the productivity has to be higher, but your translator, they should stay alive and well functioning. So these are the experiments that we have been doing since 2018, and every next initiative of this kind built on what we did or had done up to that point, and we relied on what impacts the performance in terms of the language pair. And that's also a given, I believe, because all languages are different, and topic is another factor that determines the result. On this slide, you can see actually the examples of our most recent experiments. And here's what I'd like to point out. Food industry, 60,000 segments almost, compares with oil and gas. with actually hundred thousands of segments. And this tells us quite a bit in terms of density of the terminology. The documents vary greatly from topic to topic. Plus, there's the measurement parameters. And we all know that the metrics can be set up in different ways, which could yield you like 150% of growth, which is never correct. It never gives you an accurate picture, but 5% growth is actually a reliable indicator. It could be considered quite accurate because there is no customized system that gives you a perfect machine translation, because again, perfection is very subjective as a notion. I believe you would all agree with that. Then there's the data sets that influence the end result as well. So we used different degrees of cleaning here. And like I said, when we looked at the volumes of data, we had this hypothesis that there is a threshold, some critical threshold, which could make your customized solutions unprofitable and would give you negative quality. Another slide that illustrates some of our conclusions. Every step of your cleaning is again about the limits. And to make sure that your quality keeps growing or resumes growing, we need to combine different settings, and the more uncleaned data you use, the bigger database you need to achieve some comparability with what's been cleaned. And then sometimes there's even over the threshold values, but there's a limit to that as well. So you should keep in mind that any machine translation should be post-edited, and that post-editing is similar to customization. I mean, the criteria and the approaches. So we did the experiments to come up with a dream database, if you will, this minimum that you need to process your data effectively and customize effectively as well. A lot's been said about terminology and overcoming the quality limits, but the terminology management itself costs quite a bit, financially, physically, otherwise, because it could happen that the benefits would defeat actually the purpose, including cost-wise. So there has to be this variation. I mean, terminology cleaning or the settings, dictionary-based. We experimented with both of them, and here's what we found. They're different in terms of iterations to reach the goal, and of course there's the components and the difference in them as well. Then for the terminological cleaning, you need to use the words, you need to match and make sure there's consistency and alignment. To do this based on the dictionary, you just need the dictionary, and you set the priorities for the system, and the system will do the settings itself. It will take care of all of that, and you do not need to retrain your system. Going deeper into that, as you can see on the slide, there are some obvious things that we have to point out. This will be relevant for anyone who is trying to find the best way to manage their terminology. So when we clean the terminology and customize, it takes later because there's stages involved, like I said, there's costs, the technical parameters of your database, the size of the terminology, whether it is relevant or irrelevant, all those steps. There are certain requirements to the dictionaries as well, but we all, usually we know what's a term, what constitutes a term and what doesn't. This dictionary is not limited, so if you believe that the term is relevant, you just add it. Another benefit is the positive effect that it gives, because the performance does not depend on the system of machine translation. Plus, there's this byproduct. You get a clean database for translation, because it is about optimizing the process, and we need to be able to use those clean TMs for translation. When you integrate a dictionary into machine translation, it goes faster because it is just a one-step process. You do not need a TM, and it works for those who just do not have a database. They just want to customize what they have at a lower cost. But then there are strict requirements to the dictionary, and I believe that if you've tried customizing this way, you know about them by now. The size is limited here, and the effect can be unpredictable because it is not 100% compatible with other systems. There are different, again, parameters. Plus, if you customize like this, it can be applied only when you are confident that the problem is just about the specific terms. But if it is about the syntax or the style, this will not work for you, obviously. So like I said, we wanted to measure this threshold for the size, and we combine different approaches at different stages to make sure that there is an indicator for everyone. So we took this a large size database, uncleaned, we cleaned it, we did the settings, then we integrated the dictionary with the stock system, as you can see on the slide. Then we analyzed it using 2 stages, automated metrics that you can see on the slide once again, and human expert assessment. Maria, over to you to tell us more about all those aspects and give us examples. Yes, hello everyone. I hope you can hear me okay and see my presentation on the screen. So just to add to what Margarita said, the subject matter was quite complex, finances, accounting. I mean, even a human translator, not every human translator can manage that. So we were quite curious whether the machine could do it. A few words about the terminology. We all know that consistency is key to make sure that your engine trains well, but we believe that this is actually how you can overcome this limit of quality, even with some minor volumes of data. I mean, if you're a company, you don't have much data, but you want to clean it, this is where the terminology comes into play. Now, the data sets, I believe you guys, if you customize, you know about it. The source of data is the translation memory that you have accumulated and now would like to process and need to process in a certain way to remove the noise, to eliminate the editor's mistakes, align the terminology. So we cleaned it, we cleaned the terminology, and we did the technical cleaning. The latter one, meaning that we removed the segments that are useless to train the system or can train it badly, because you don't want to put in any segments without any letters. Or we all know that those partial matches can be a pain, or then there could be those critical errors. Something that Konstantin referred to regarding misalignment, when your source is mismatched with the target, and it becomes critical at some point, of course. So we agreed on the parameters and on the solutions to remove the noise. So we called it ETTMX Cleaner. As you can see, we're still tweaking this tool, and we're still working on the repetitions issue. But the basic functions, in terms of the basic functions, it's already usable. Now the terminology and the cleaning here. So we have a dictionary, and we use that dictionary to check the translation. Then we validate the result by, we have a human validate the result. The effectiveness of those programs and solutions varies. It's good if your system can recognize certain terms and work with them, but using not just the formal criteria, but also if it's able to recognize the grammar. I mean, if it's a wrong case, it'll take less time to check the relevance. We also have a custom solution, QA term, which is adjusted to the Russian language, the morphology, so it checks not just formally, but it actually understands the grammar of the terminology. Now the benefits. In this respect, I believe they are pretty obvious. We teach or train the engine to use the terms that we need and want to see in the project, and not those accepted universally. Now, regarding the challenges, there are challenges in terms of potential automation. Then sometimes sometimes the translator might deliberately opt for a different term. I mean, you cannot just replace it all automatically. I mean, it has to be validated by a human or rejected. So we use, like I said, our custom tools to manage terminology, ET term extract, to work with the terminology itself for a one language dictionary, and ET QA term. Now, Margarita, over to you. Yes, like I said, we can manage the metrics differently, and some of those solutions could give us irrelevant data. So we did some preliminary work. We cleaned the tags. We removed them because we know that sometimes the metrics can take those as essential for the measurement, but we didn't want that to happen. Then the punctuation and the parameters of those automated metrics. We went for a few of them, for several of them actually, to measure the quality from different angles for maximum objectivity. You can see those on the screen, something that we just could not go without to make sure that our translation complies with the benchmarks. Then there were cases when we had to take into account certain linguistic aspects for some of the language pairs. Plus, this last metric allows us to go deeper into the syntax, which is pretty relevant because we took Russian English as our pair. These are the outcomes, the scores for the metrics. In the table, you'll know that we measure this from 0 to 1, and 0 is what you are aiming for. And this is what we can see, this gradual increase in quality, not just depending on the cleaning, but also depending on the size. And this works for every metric. 17,000 was the smallest database, and 22,000, both uncleaned, was the largest. So these 5,000 segments were critical in this case. And this can be explained by the fact that the data in the size of the sampling mattered more than the noise, for example. But then the cleaning also played a role nonetheless. And in the two final cases, you can see that. You can see the growth. So what are the conclusions? Customizing works even if your translation memory is not that big. We think 20,000 is the critical size, and also we need to keep in mind that it is also pretty obvious, but the metrics, it is not always that they reflect the quality change for the better. Maria? Yes, thank you. So, dictionary-based approach, how to combine customization and the terminology. You just integrate the dictionary into your customized engine, and we had high hopes for this because it is faster, but we should keep in mind that your regular dictionary for the project used by your translators will not work here, because there are dictionaries for the QA assessment, as we know, and there are other dictionaries that apply here as well. So your machine should be compatible. As you can see on this slide, there's a number of systems here, and I believe that each system has its own requirements, dictionary-wise. These are ours. We had a pretty serious limitation term-wise, formatting-wise. Usually we don't want synonyms here, and ideally that terminology should be specialized and independent from the context. We added, though, some additional translations for some of the terms because we wanted to train our system to pick the best one, and that worked to an extent. this is the score, and you can see for each metric there's been this minimum change. So it's more or less the same, I mean, the result. And you should also keep in mind that this is conditional because it is not every metric that responds to the replacement when you change one term and put the other one instead. And in some cases, context played a great role. I mean, when we changed the right one with the wrong one from the dictionary. If the dictionary is not that large in size, with one document you will not see any growth, but then for the other one it will matter. But if you check it yourself, you will be able to see the difference, as well as if you run the QA assessment, you will see that the consistency is better. So some examples. I mean, show me a translator who does not like to have a good laugh over what's been translated by a machine. So free translation was translated by an untrained engine as a free of charge one, and by a trained engine as just a freestyle translation, which was actually correct. There's also a option proposed by a human translator, but machine cannot do that yet. Another phrase, group amalgamations or demergers. Like I said, it was finance and accounting. So the uncustomized system went to amalgamation from chemistry, and the mergers was something that the machine didn't know, so it just transliterated the word. So when we trained it, it was right, consolidations or demergers or divisions. This was the correct terminology, the correct translation. So when we trained our dictionary, it reproduced the translation, keeping the amalgamations though. Now, the standard, the one we were aiming for. If you look at the screen, you will see that the translator went even to get it to a whole next level of quality that the machine does not manage yet. Another example about the cost of sales, highlighted in green. You will not find it in the customized translation for the uncleaned database, but then when we cleaned it and aligned everything, the engine, we could train the engine right, and this is the result that we have. We have better quality for terminology. Another way to get the same term was to add it to the dictionary. It didn't take much effort, even though we still see the errors here. Upon sale versus post-sale. There was another funny story with the amount of money. Turned out that for the machine, it was pretty easy to just translate. What we thought it was easy to translate a number spelled out, but the result was kind of unexpected. See, there's this amount, $1 billion. The first engine did it right, even though it misplaced the order. I mean, the order is confused here. The second one is is an off translation, and the third one lost the billion part, and we kept translating it, but it just didn't give us the billion in translation. Then when we customized it, the billion was back, even though the declination is off, but the rest is okay. And then it was the human who guessed that 75 was actually the cents. This is what we failed to train our engine. So it looks pretty simple, but turns out that still we cannot rely on the machine, not just yet. And as translators, we know how critical it can be when it comes to financial statements. We have another example, but I don't think we have any more time left. We will just keep it on the screen. Okay, so what's the conclusion? Yeah, get in there. Just a quick example, if I may, because I have it right here, and it breaks my heart to not have you see it. Okay. Yes. So oftentimes we say that these metrics are conditional, but we have a lot of examples when the same sentence was translated by the machine and by the human translator correctly. Even though the machine translation is a bit awkward, the human translator went for a more naturally sounding phrasing, but essentially both sentences are the same, even though if you see, and then if you can see the metrics, the score is pretty low. So, like I said, the metrics are conditional, and the standards are not always standard. So, Margarita, over to you for the conclusions. To keep it simple and short, because these things are pretty obvious. And anyway, those parameters are not universal, and these benchmarks are subjective. So you should have different criteria that you measure against to make sure it works best. If it's about the dynamics, you need to be able to, you can use it to calculate the cost of post editing. I mean, you need to take it into account. Plus, you don't just integrate a dictionary, you need to make sure that the rest is compatible and that the rest applies correctly. This is not an easy task, so we need sure that our limits are set correctly. We figured out the terminology, but the main takeaway is that the post-editing is just this great solution to improve the quality of your machine translation, because at some point customizing becomes ineffective, and the human will always be in the center of the process. Thank you. Thank you. Now time for the questions. Let me just check, make sure that I understand you right. So, you customize starting from 20,000 sentences, right? What I meant was that you need to have at least 20,000 if you don't have a large database. But what about the terminology? I'm afraid I didn't catch that. We decided that if you go for the terminology cleaning when it is the human that uses the tool to measure whether the terminology is relevant, it gives you better quality than if compared to just integrating a dictionary without cleaning your database. Okay, thank you. Questions? Hello, Fyodor Bezrukov, Logros Ukraine, Logros IT. So you said 20,000 segments, which is the size as the size of for the TM to train, right? So, do you have any info regarding the products, maybe the range where you start developing your custom MT? I mean, the point where your costs do not exceed your benefits. That's question one. And how many of those do you got? Two. Okay, so we didn't yet look into this matter particularly, but if you see that your machine makes so many errors that literally or nearly kill your editor, that means that you need to customize. Because sometimes, given this this variety of machine translation systems and the fields, the subject matter. You just need to decide for yourself whether what is it you want. I mean, if you want to speed up the translation process, then you need to find a system that would give you fewer errors, minimum errors, and that would also depend on the inflow of your orders. When we saw that we had oil and gas projects coming in, and there was more of them than medical, for example, being 90%, then it makes sense to focus on the oil and gas. Further, our recommendation would be $70,000 per year. Okay, I get it. So it's not so much about the product line, it's rather about the field. Yes, exactly. Okay, then my next question regarding terminology. When we wanted to integrate the dictionary through Google, we faced a number of challenges, mostly related to the terminology and the register, because the machine would not be able to recognize different forms of the word. So my question is, did you guys manage to find a solution here? Yes, I'll take this one. Terminology is my domain. So here's the thing. If you just integrate the dictionary, there will be problems like that because it will not be able to recognize the forms. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say that. We didn't use Google. We used another system, but I don't think there is a system that would give you a solution and would recognize those different forms. So when we did the cleaning, we found actually a program, we found a software that could do that. Instead of having a human do this for like 100 hours, removing what's irrelevant, you can have the machine do that for you, recognize the cases and such. But it was the software that we had to look for. You're talking about a specific project, right? Well, we did the same to our database. Same as when you validate the terminology for a specific project. The methodology, the approach was the same. So the answer is no, right? Yes, most likely. Sounds like that. So, do I understand you correctly that you decided to feed the correct segments instead of integrating the glossary? Yes, exactly. Okay, thank you. We also experimented with that, trying to go for the TMX or TBX, and then your metrics go just way down or back. Was it the same as happened with you guys? Yeah, it was something strange. So, I mean, in theory, the glossaries are supported, but in reality, not really. Well, our glossary actually, it worked, but it didn't really impact our performance, had no influence on that whatsoever. But even if it's just one word, it can distort your text tremendously, but the score will not change all that much. So this is like that joke. I mean, do you have a glossary? No, I don't. What if I find one? Yes, so we are moving to the discussion, I guess, to the discussion part. So just a general question about the glossaries and the databases. Has anyone tried to integrate something like Marfun for the declinations and to use all those different dictionaries and have them interact somehow, combine them somehow? Maybe in Thailand.
Yes, I can hear you now. Yes, I think that will be the topic for our next study. Yes, but just to add here, I know that there is a system which counts in cases, some declinations, even if you have the basic form added to the glossary. To my knowledge, yes, as far as I tried and tested it, but I know that prompt system takes it into account because it works with the language itself. It understands all the necessity and all the subtleties and nuances of languages. That's the answer. Yes, there is a thing like that. They take synthetic data. You take a term, and then you have all the declinations or cases of the word added. Yes, but just think about the scope of data. But just, no, I mean, just take one data, and then you have it through the script. You allow it to go through the script. Yes, you can do it with the translation, and you can add synthetically generated part. Iconic AG Online, try that. But, well, unfortunately, it didn't yield any good results. Well, that's the way I think. Well, maybe if you had some iconic representatives in Agent Online, probably they would accuse me of being not competent enough. But because that could be some world breakthrough. I think that is all. Everyone's sworn out. We had a successful day. So let's give a round of applause to our interpreters and tech team who been working the entire day. Great job. I want to express my gratitude to the organizers. And I think that we can call it a day for today, a successful day of presentations. And now it's time for us to go swimming. Thank you for the presentation.